Hi, Husta.
How are you, Gloria?
I'm really good. Really nice to see you, and
Yep.
thank you for agreeing to be part of the Racism Not Welcome campaign. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you?
Okay, I come originally from Argentina, but before coming to Australia, I lived for 2, 3 years in Europe. I'm basically a musician, but in Argentina, I trade in literacy for adults and also train in psychology and law and in music. In Australia, I've studied music, a Bachelor of Music Education, a Master in Latin American Studies, and a PhD in Contemporary Art. I've been the director of Café Carnivale as part of Carnivale Festival and Musica Viva. I worked for SBS and I worked with my band Papalote for 43 years. And I've done a lot of work in schools, trying to promote diversity in schools, carrying about 50 or 60 instruments to schools to prove them how harmony works in multiculturalism and cultural diversity, how you could create a better society when people mix with each other and they create a new culture. We were talking about music mainly, but we were reflecting the multiculturalism of our society, the society in Latin America. There is a mixture between people that came from Spain, the indigenous population, and people that came from Africa forced. But today, we are one society, and it's not that it doesn't exist racism, but at some levels, they've reached exceptional, especially in music, exceptional situations because of that mixture.
So, you and I know that Australia appears to be a very successful multicultural country. But if you are not white, you also know that racism is around in
Yep.
this country. So, my question to you is, do you think racism is present in Australia?
Yes, it has different forms, it has changed over the years. I'm talking about my experience. I haven't dealt with racism through academic study. I always sympathize with the causes of the Aborigines in Australia because since I remember in the 80s, be aware that I've been here for 43 years, since the 80s, been this issue of deaths in custody. Then in the 80s, we were supporting the Aboriginal people being killed in prison. And today, we still have the same problem. How come in 43 years the issue couldn't be addressed? How come the conditions of indigenous people in Australia are like third world countries? In a country we're supposed to be top in the world? Then I think racism exists, and in different levels to migrant communities as well. It depends on the color of your skin, the way you're treated. Like I remember being in tour in Queensland with a guy from South America, dark skin, darker than me, and we were stopped by the police because they thought he was an Aborigine. When they realized that we had foreign accents, they apologized. They thought we were Aborigines, and then they were going to stop us and interrogate us just because we went to a shop to buy something. And someone called the police, these black guys are in the shop. But the issue is that in my case, I feel that I have to be double qualified to access the same job of someone else that might have some privilege because, of cultural advantages or racial advantage. There've been studies about racism, and that work I have there about the taxi driver, the cook, and the greengrocer, it talks about how many people come qualified from overseas and they arrive to Australia and they become a taxi driver. And as a musician, I worked for the New South Wales Minister for the Arts for about 6 years, and my role was to combat discrimination in the music, within the music industry. And I employed lots of musicians. I had a project called Café Carnivale. I employed lots of musicians. They were so happy because for the first time they were expected doing something that wasn't mainstream. And mainstream is not an issue of success. Mainstream is whatever for the West is important or is commercially viable in the West, or the way the West sends the messages to the world's population. And these people, there were people from Ukraine, from Russia, now that we are in this issue, lots of South America, a lot of people from Africa, from different countries, people from Asia. They were so happy that for once they had an opportunity to express their work, to express the artwork without any subtitles. You know, say, oh, these beautiful people coming for such, not to be patronized, to be presented as artists. You know?
Are you able to share with us an example of racism that you have experienced?
I think the worst is when I applied for immigration and I went with my future wife to the immigration department. The officer told her in front of me that migrants come to this country and later they become alcoholics and they bash up their wives. And I went into an argument with the guy. You know, no one dares to argue with these people because they have all the power. But I started arguing, how can you say that to her
Your future wife?
in front of me? I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, like after that, my visa took years. I was in this limbo for years. But why? Why?
So the 21st of March is International Day of the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. In Australia, that day is celebrated as Harmony Day. How do you feel about that?
In Australia, there's a kind of mastery of disguise.
Master of disguise, I like that.
Yeah, because there's the issues have their proper names. Yes, harmony, we all like harmony. Even in music, we like harmony. It's very nice to have a harmonious society, such as I said. But Harmony Day and a day against racism are not the same thing. It's like trying to, it's not trivialized, but it's disguising. It's disguising. Things should be called by their own name. Like Workers' Day is the Workers' Day. The day against racism should be the day against racism. Yes, harmony is nice, but it's not what it's meant to be. And if it should be a day of education, it should be the day of education, or we should address issues of racism and discrimination in this country today.
Specifically.
Specifically.
And so my next question to you is that this campaign came about because there were specific racist issues within the Inner West.
Okay.
And the community organizations got together, collaborated, and came up with this idea of racism not welcome. So what are your thoughts about this campaign and the signs racism not welcome?
I think the campaign is fine and the signs are fine. I think that the conversation has to go further than the sign. The racist person doesn't think he or she is racist or doesn't know. And some people who belong to a minority group, but they don't look that different, sometimes they're not aware of how difficult it is for other people. Then it's the conversation. Like I've seen in the internet, when someone takes a racist attitude in the metro or to street vendors, other people, majority people, privileged people, reacting against the person that is committing the crime, because racism is a crime. Then that's what has to happen. Like it's not just to accept the sign in your street, it's also to participate. If someone is harassed in a train, in a bus, please react. If a woman is harassed, also react. you know?
You're right. It's easy to empathize people by saying things. But I think the doing is really where allyship can really have power.
Yep.
And so I guess anyone listening to this, if you are in a position of privilege just by being born white, you are privileged. And what we are saying is use that position to really understand what it is that marginalized people go through. And that devoting your time to really understand the issues is really helpful, because then you can use your position to really make an important changes. So that was fantastic, and I think we might leave it there and just thank you so much for your insight and your knowledge, and 40 years of being here and still haven't lost your enthusiasm, and it's just wonderful to be in your presence.